Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Zero Hour. This is Richard RJ Eskow, and with the Republican Visigoths in charge of everything on the federal level, both houses of Congress and the presidency, can we really do anything about the rising inequality and corporate dominance of the economy we've seen over the last few years? Specifically, can cities do anything about it? Here to talk about that now with us is Sarah Anderson. Sarah is from the Institute for Policy Studies. She's been on the program before. She's a co-editor of inequality.org, and she has been the lead author on all 23 of the Institute's annual executive excess reports. And that's specifically what we're going to be talking about today, the excessive pay being received by CEOs nowadays and the city's response to that. So first of all, Sarah, thanks for coming on the program.
My pleasure. I'm so glad to be here talking about something positive.
Yeah, it really is. I probably should have let the audience know in the beginning that it is, in fact, something positive that's happening at the city level. So I'll let you tell us what that is.
Okay. Well, the happy news that I have to report is that this week the City Council in Portland, Oregon passed what will be the world's first tax penalty on corporations that have extremely wide gaps between their CEO pay and their worker pay. And so what will happen is companies that do business in the city of Portland, so they don't have to be headquartered there, they just need to have some kind of business presence. If they're paying their CEO more than 100 times what their median worker makes, they'll pay a surtax on the city's existing business tax. And the surtax will go up if they're paying their CEO more than 250 times what they're paying their median workers. And of course, doing this just in one city really isn't the point, but I think what the City Council wants to do there is spark a national movement and get other cities and states to really strike a blow at this key driver of inequality, our runaway CEO pay, and show that something can be done at the local and state level.
Well, it is. I think if it becomes a trend, I think it really is promising. I'm kind of excited about it, too. Now, I should have looked up the statistics before our interview, but if I recall correctly, back in the 50s or 60s, the typical ratio of CEO paid average worker pay was something like 25-1. Is that about right?
Yeah. 25-1 in the 60s, then around 1980, it might have been around 40-1. Today, it depends a little on how you measure it, but it's typically over 300-1. And that is completely off the charts compared to other countries that have very competitive big corporations. Bloomberg just came out with some average CEO pay numbers that show that the average in the US, it's around, again, it depends on how you measure it, around 12 or 13 million. That's about double what it is in countries like Germany and Canada, and it's a much bigger multiple of what it is in Japan.
And, one of the things I always like to say when we're talking about this issue of executive compensation, of CEO pay, is that the inequality and the other problems created by this differential, this pay differential, it even goes beyond the fact that some of these folks are making such a ridiculous sum of money. It's the incentives that cause them to make so much money that also creates problems, right?
Absolutely. That's where the real danger is. When you have outrageous sums of compensation on the table, CEOs are encouraged to do outrageous things to hit that jackpot by any means necessary. And the most dramatic example of this, of course, was the financial crisis, where we saw the recklessness and greed of executives that wanted to hit those bonus jackpots, really driving our economy off a cliff. But that's just the most dramatic example. Every day throughout corporate America, CEOs are incentivized to slash costs in order to bump up the value of the company's stock in the short term in ways that might inflate their stock-based pay, but be harmful to the company, the workers, the community in the long term. So I'm talking about offshoring jobs, slashing investment in research and development, polluting the river, all kinds of things that are really harmful and not good for business prosperity in the long term, but could fatten the paycheck of the CEO.
Yeah, I always, I don't always say, but I have said at least once that, it basically turns every CEO from the manager of a corporation or an operation to a kind of venture capitalist who's just trying to squeeze the
Right.
most buck out of that company's stock value that can be squeezed this quarter or this year, right?
Absolutely. And there's a lot of business research that's been done to show that it's just bad for business to have such extreme gaps. It turns the CEO into, this one guy in the corner office who, apparently creates all the value for the company and everyone else is just a little helper. And that's not good for the kind of team spirit that is really required to have prosperous businesses. I was really happy to see with the before the vote in Portland on the CEO pay surtax, we had, for example, someone who's a former McKinsey partner, Doug Smith, submitting a statement in support strictly from the business perspective, saying this is just simply not good for business to have these extreme gaps. It leads to all kinds of short-term thinking, bad worker morale, high turnover among employees. And so there are different reasons to be concerned about these extreme CEO pay gaps. And I think that's part of the real potential here for building a movement around this.
Yeah, to put it in the simplest terms, I mean, someone is not going to want to invest in a multi-year strategy to make a company grow if that's going to hurt their own pay, and so they're going to squeeze it for every buck they can by layoffs and cost cutting, as you said, and so on. So okay, so we have this problem of excessive and misguided, misincentivized executive pay. So we have one city now, Portland, that's passed this law, as you said, and as they have said, that's not even a rounding error on a corporation's balance sheet. But if a lot of cities do this, then all of a sudden it starts to cost them real money to overpay their CEO, right?
Absolutely. And one thing that's great about the Portland initiative is that the Revenue Bureau there did some really serious research looking at the potential for spreading this around the rest of the country. So they looked at the top 30 largest cities by population and found that the vast majority of them have tax structures that would allow for them to have this kind of special tax penalty against companies with big gaps between their CEO and their worker pay. So a lot of valuable research has already been done to kind of lay the groundwork for this. And we're hearing, this just happened on Wednesday, and we're already starting to hear from elected officials and social movement groups that are interested in looking into whether they could do this in their own community.
Okay, we're talking with Sarah Anderson of the Institute for Policy Studies. And Sarah, I want to run something by you, which is, look, I see, frankly, no silver linings whatsoever in the election of Donald Trump as president, but I do think that makes this the ideal time to push this, or very important time to push this. We have, for example, his nominee for Secretary of Labor, the most anti-labor candidate for that position ever, including a guy who gave an ode to why machines are preferable to human beings as employees. They're always upselling. They never ask for vacation or benefits and so on. So we have this guy. Now, it's not coming direct. I wrote about him, but I can't recall. I believe he was making well over 100 times the average pay of the employees at Hardee's and Carl's Jr., which are the two restaurant chains his corporation manages. Do you happen to know, first of all, by any chance?
You know me well. I immediately went to look to see if I could find out what he made last year, but because they're privately held now, I don't think that that information is available. But I totally agree with you that because of what is happening in Washington, this whole horror story, I think it's going to put a lot more pressure on city and state governments to think creatively and to find innovative ways to protect workers, to reduce inequality, to reduce the pain that the poor and the middle class are going to feel as a result of what's going on federally. I mean, you talked about the labor secretary, but another thing I'm really scared about is the tax reforms that they're looking at. So Trump and Republican members of Congress are ready to go with a tax plan that would slash taxes on the wealthy and corporations. If they get their way, we're looking at really draconian cuts in our federal budget and likely spending on safety net programs. So I think states and cities around the country are going to be scrambling to look for new sources of revenue that are progressive and fair. And this is one that they should be considering.
And people may think of Portland as being something of an outlier, and I want to kind of put that in perspective because really it's not. I think if you look at, as you well know, if you look at the elected governments in many of America's cities, New York, Los Angeles, and so on, Chicago, no, but it looks like it could be moving that way. Cities are really centered, even in red states, are typically or often centers of really progressive political activity. So there's every reason to believe this initiative could catch on, right?
Absolutely. And I have to really give credit to the three people on the Portland City Council who voted for this because there was strong business opposition to this. They did get the Wall Street Journal editorial board to run a horrible, ideological piece against this. So it wasn't like this was a cakewalk in Portland. People there stuck out their necks and voted this thing through because they want to make it easier for others to follow. And so I really hope other people are out there looking at this and taking it seriously. And I think within a year we could see maybe a half dozen other places at least considering proposals to do this tax. And let me also add one reason that's so important to build this movement in support of this is because to implement these taxes, what makes it very cost effective to do so is because at the federal level, we had a victory in 2015 where we got the SEC to require companies to report these CEO to worker pay ratios. So we'll have this source of the pay ratio data at the federal level that'll make it very easy to administrate these kinds of taxes on companies with big gaps. If that thing gets repealed by Republicans, we will have more challenges with this. And so we need people to really go to the mat to protect things that have been won in recent years that will help boost these state and city efforts.
Well, that's really a great point. And of course, the Republicans could repeal it. And one last word about the Secretary of Labor. One of the reasons why he's been an adamant opponent of the minimum wage increases people are needing to fight for 15. And so one of the reasons why he's been an opponent of health benefits and so on is because that helps his own pay, but it increases the multiples at their own time. So the interactivity, the relationship, the way one of these fuels the other is such a big deal.
Every dollar they cut in healthcare, benefits for their workers, pension benefits for their workers is another dollar in the CEO's pocket because it can boost the stock price. And most CEO pay is made up of stock-based compensation now.
Well, I'm so glad that we were able to talk about this because I really do think it's important in these sometimes discouraging times to find things that are working and promote them. And I hope the next time you come on this program, Sarah, we're talking about this initiative and how it's passed in several other cities as well.
Absolutely. I look forward to that.
Me too. Sarah Anderson with the Institute for Policy Studies, thanks for coming on the program.
Sure. Thank you.
And we will be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.